The air in Kyoto on June 21st, 1582, was thick with smoke and the smell of betrayal. Inside the Honno-ji temple, the most powerful man in Japan was trapped. Oda Nobunaga, the Demon King, the conqueror who was just weeks away from uniting a nation torn apart by a century of civil war, was surrounded. Not by a rival warlord, not by a foreign army, but by his own men. His most trusted general, Akechi Mitsuhide, had turned on him. As the flames licked the paper walls of his sanctuary, Nobunaga performed seppuku, his body and his ambition consumed by the inferno. He was 47 years old. The question isn't just how he died. The question is why he had to. Why did the man who came so close to winning it all have to be erased from the board by his own hand-picked successor? To understand that, you have to understand the monster he had become, and the nation his death would ultimately create. If you're fascinated by the brutal turning points in history, the stories of ambition and betrayal that shape our world, consider subscribing. We tell these stories every week.
Our story doesn't begin in the fire, but decades earlier, with a boy who everyone thought was an idiot. They called him the Great Fool of Owari. This wasn't a term of endearment. Born the heir to a minor warlord, the young Oda Nobunaga defied every convention. While other samurai's sons studied poetry and practiced archery in pristine dojos, Nobunaga ran wild with commoners. He dressed in bizarre, half-foreign clothes, spoke crudely, and showed zero respect for the ancient traditions that governed their world. His own father despaired. His retainers whispered about replacing him with his more conventional younger brother. They saw a fool. What they failed to see was a mind unburdened by the past, a mind that saw the rigid, honor-bound system of the samurai for what it was, a death sentence in a changing world. The ultimate act of disrespect came at his own father's funeral. In a room filled with solemn, grieving warriors, Nobunaga stormed in, grabbed a handful of ceremonial incense, and threw it at his father's memorial tablet before stalking out. It was an unforgivable offense, an act of pure madness. Or was it? This singular act of rebellion sent a clear message to everyone in the clan. I am not bound by your rules. I am not the man my father was. The old ways die with him. It was a brutal, shocking consolidation of power, disguised as a temper tantrum. He was forcing everyone to choose a side: the comfortable, predictable past with his brother, or the terrifying, unknown future with him. This was the moment the fool began to show his fangs. His first major test came from his own father-in-law, a ruthless warlord known as the Viper of Mino. Saito Dosen agreed to meet his supposedly foolish son-in-law, likely planning to assassinate him or size up his territory for invasion. He expected to see a ragtag band led by a buffoon. Instead, Nobunaga arrived with a disciplined force of ashigaru, peasant foot soldiers, armed not just with spears, but with an unusually large number of matchlock firearms. Their armor was uniform, their movements precise. The Viper was stunned. He reportedly told his retainers that one day his own sons would be stabling the horses for the Fool of Owari. He saw what others couldn't. Beneath the bizarre exterior was a military revolutionary who understood that the future of warfare wasn't about noble samurai duels, but about disciplined, well-equipped armies. In 1560, the impossible happened. Imagawa Yoshimoto, one of the most powerful warlords in Japan, marched on the capital of Kyoto with an army of 25,000 men. Standing directly in his path was Oda Nobunaga, with a force of barely 3,000. It was supposed to be an execution. His advisors begged him to surrender, to hide in his castle and hope for a negotiated peace.
Nobunaga did neither. He performed a war dance at dawn, rode out with a handful of men, and gathered his small army. As a massive thunderstorm rolled in, providing the perfect cover, he made his move. He knew the Imagawa army, celebrating an early victory, would be complacent, their camp located in a narrow, wooded gorge. It was a 1-in-a-million gamble. Under the cover of the blinding rain and crashing thunder, Nobunaga's tiny force fell upon the Imagawa command post like a bolt of lightning. The massive army was scattered, leaderless, and completely unprepared for a frontal assault in a storm. In the chaos, Imagawa Yoshimoto was cut down, his head taken as a trophy. When the storm cleared, the news spread like wildfire. A provincial nobody, a fool, had defeated one of the greatest armies in Japan and killed its legendary commander. The Battle of Okehazama wasn't just a victory, it was a statement. It catapulted Nobunaga onto the national stage. He was no longer the fool of Owari, he was a contender, and he had just learned a valuable lesson. Fortune favors the bold, and heaven has no pity for the unprepared. With his reputation secured, Nobunaga's ambition exploded. He forged an alliance with a patient, cunning neighbor named Tokugawa Ieyasu, a name you'll want to remember. Together, they began a relentless campaign of conquest. His goal was simple and terrifyingly direct. He adopted a new motto carved into his personal seal, Tenka Fubu. It meant, roughly, rule the realm by military force. There would be no negotiation with those who stood in his way, no compromise. You either submitted to the Oda clan or you were annihilated. It was a new brutal philosophy for a new brutal age, and to achieve it, he would shatter every pillar of the old world. But Nobunaga's revolution wasn't just fought with swords and spears. He understood something his rivals didn't. Wars are won with money. He implemented radical economic policies known as Rakuichi Rakuza, or free markets and open guilds. He abolished the toll booths that choked travel and trade, broke up the powerful merchant guilds that fixed prices and standardized currency. He encouraged trade with European merchants, particularly the Portuguese, not just for their ideas, but for their guns. By creating a vibrant, merit-based economy, he filled his coffers, allowing him to field a professional standing army, while his enemies were still relying on part-time peasant levies. Nowhere was his revolutionary thinking more apparent than at the Battle of Nagashino in 1575. He faced the legendary cavalry of the Takeda clan, considered the most unstoppable force in Japan. Any other commander would have met them with a wall of spears. Nobunaga met them with a wall of bullets. He assembled 3,000 gunners, a massive number for the time, and arranged them near rotating ranks behind wooden barricades. As the first line fired, they would cycle to the back to reload, while the second line stepped up to fire, then the third. It was the birth of the volley fire. The Takeda cavalry, the pride of the samurai tradition, charged into a continuous, unrelenting hailstorm of lead. The result was a massacre. The age of the heroic samurai, of single combat deciding the fate of battles, died that day at Nagashino. Nobunaga proved that a trained peasant with a gun could kill the most skilled samurai from 100 yards away. It was a victory of technology and tactics over tradition and honor, and it terrified the old guard of Japan. He wasn't just defeating his enemies, he was making their entire way of life obsolete. He was changing the very definition of what it meant to be a warrior. And for many, this was a blasphemy that could not be forgiven. But Nobunaga's most powerful enemies weren't other samurai clans. They were the great Buddhist monasteries. For centuries, these religious institutions had wielded immense power. They owned vast tracts of land, were exempt from taxes, and maintained their own private armies of warrior monks known as Sohei.
The temple complex on Mount Hiei in particular was a thorn in Nobunaga's side. It sheltered his enemies, defied his authority, and represented the old power structure he sought to destroy. In 1571, after the monks repeatedly sided with his rivals, his patience finally ran out.
What happened next is what earned him the title Demon King. He ordered his army of 30,000 to surround Mount Hiei. His orders were simple and absolute: kill everyone. Man, woman, and child. Show no mercy. For an entire day and night, his soldiers hunted down and slaughtered the inhabitants of the mountain, burning the sprawling, priceless temple complex to the ground. An estimated 3,000 to 4,000 people were killed. It was an act of shocking, almost unimaginable brutality, even for the Sengoku period. He wasn't just defeating an enemy, he was committing sacrilege on a scale never seen before. He was sending a message to all of Japan: no god, no tradition, no holy ground will protect you from my wrath. The massacre on Mount Hiei was just the beginning. His longest and bloodiest war was against the Iko-Iki, a militant sect of Pure Land Buddhists. These were not just monks, they were a popular uprising of peasants, nobles, and monks united by a fanatical faith who believed that dying for their cause guaranteed them passage to paradise. They controlled entire provinces, and their main fortress at Nagashima was a nigh impregnable network of islands and rivers. For years they defied Nobunaga, even killing 2 of his brothers in battle. They were a rebellion fueled by faith, and Nobunaga decided to extinguish that faith with fire. In 1574, after years of frustrating sieges, Nobunaga cornered 20,000 Iko-Iki men, women, and children in their last strongholds at Nagashima. He built a massive wooden wall around them, cutting off any hope of escape, and then he set it on fire. He burned them all alive, 20,000 people. It was a methodical, calculated act of extermination. He saw their faith not as a religion to be respected, but as a political ideology that threatened his absolute control, and so he decided to wipe it from the earth. This was the man at the height of his power, utterly ruthless, pragmatic, and willing to commit any atrocity to achieve his goal of a unified Japan under his singular, secular rule. And now we come to the man who would bring it all crashing down, Akechi Mitsuhide. If Nobunaga was fire, Mitsuhide was ice. He was a man of culture, a talented poet, and a respected diplomat. He was everything the fool of Owari was not. He joined Nobunaga's service later in his career, but rose quickly through the ranks due to his sharp intellect and administrative skill. He was one of Nobunaga's most capable and trusted generals. Nobunaga rewarded him with vast lands and great responsibility. On the surface, their relationship was a picture of a lord and his loyal vassal, but beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. Nobunaga had a cruel streak. He enjoyed publicly humiliating his retainers to keep them in line, and Mitsuhide, with his refined, sensitive nature, became a favorite target. The insults were constant and brutal. At a banquet, Nobunaga mockingly called him Kinkan Atama, gold-headed baldy, in front of the entire court, a nickname that stuck. In another infamous incident, a drunken Nobunaga grabbed Mitsuhide's head, forced it to the floor, and used it as a drum, beating a rhythm on his skull with a fan. For a man of Mitsuhide's pride and traditional samurai upbringing, these were not just jokes. They were deep, unforgivable insults that chipped away at his loyalty, one public shaming at a time. But it wasn't just personal pride. Mitsuhide was a traditionalist. He was deeply disturbed by Nobunaga's scorched earth tactics, the burning of Mount Hiei, the slaughter of the Iko-iki, the disrespect for the emperor and the shogun. These acts flew in the face of everything Mitsuhide believed in. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal, that Mitsuhide pleaded with Nobunaga to spare a defeated clan he had ties to. Nobunaga not only refused, but had the entire clan executed, and then allegedly awarded their lands to Mitsuhide. It was a twisted, cruel test of loyalty. Each atrocity he was forced to participate in pushed him further away from the lord he had sworn to serve.
The breaking point may have come in the weeks before the betrayal. Nobunaga tasked Mitsuhide with hosting a lavish banquet for their ally Tokugawa Ieyasu. Mitsuhide, a man of impeccable taste, poured his heart into the preparations. But when Nobunaga arrived to inspect the feast, he flew into a rage, claiming the fish was rotten and the preparations were insulting. He kicked over the meticulously prepared dishes, screamed at Mitsuhide in front of the servants and guests, and relieved him of his duties as host. It was the ultimate public disgrace, a declaration that even at his best, Mitsuhide was not good enough. And then came the final, fateful order. Nobunaga was preparing for his final great campaign to unify Western Japan. He ordered Mitsuhide to march his army west to reinforce Hashiba Hideyoshi, another of his top generals. Nobunaga himself was resting in Kyoto at a temple called Honno-ji, accompanied by only a few dozen pages and bodyguards. His main armies were hundreds of miles away. He was, for the first time in a long time, completely vulnerable. As Mitsuhide gathered his 13,000 soldiers and began to march, he reached a crossroads. One path led west, to his duty. The other path led east, to Kyoto, to destiny. In the middle of the night, Mitsuhide halted his army. He gathered his senior officers, who were confused as to why they were marching toward the capital instead of away from it. It was here he revealed his treason. According to legend, he raised his voice and declared, "The enemy awaits at Honno-ji." The enemy was not some rival clan. The enemy was their master, Oda Nobunaga. He had crossed the Rubicon. There was no turning back. His army, loyal to him and likely sharing his grievances, turned and marched on the sleeping capital. Before dawn, 13,000 soldiers surrounded a temple defended by less than 100. Nobunaga was awakened by the sounds of battle. At first, he assumed it was a common brawl, but when arrows began to fall into the courtyard, he knew. When a page told him the banners belonged to the Akechi clan, he reportedly said only, "It cannot be helped." The Demon King, the great strategist, knew he was checkmating, but he would not be taken alive. He fought. Accounts say he took up a bow until its string snapped, then a spear, cutting down several enemy soldiers before being wounded himself. He showed no fear, only a cold acceptance of his fate. As the temple burned around him, a wounded Nobunaga retreated into the inner chambers. There, he committed seppuku, the ritual suicide of the samurai, rather than suffer the disgrace of capture. His loyal page, Mori Ranmaru, set the room ablaze to ensure his master's head would never be taken as a trophy. By the time Akechi Mitsuhide's men stormed the inner sanctum, there was nothing left but fire and ash. Oda Nobunaga, the man who was on the verge of conquering all of Japan, had vanished from the earth. His body was never found. Akechi Mitsuhide's victory was short-lived. He declared himself the new shogun, but the support he expected from other clans never materialized. They saw him not as a liberator, but as a dishonorable traitor. And he had made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed it would take weeks for Nobunaga's top general, Hashiba Hideyoshi, to learn of the betrayal and return from his campaign in the West.
But Hideyoshi, upon hearing the news, did something incredible. He made peace with his enemy in a single day and force-marched his entire army back towards Kyoto at a speed thought impossible, covering over 100 miles in just a few days. He was coming for revenge. Just 13 days after the Honno-ji incident, the armies of Hideyoshi and Mitsuhide clashed at the Battle of Yamazaki. Mitsuhide's army, outnumbered and demoralized, was quickly routed. He fled the battlefield, a fugitive in the country he had hoped to rule. His end was ignominious. He was killed by peasant bandits in a bamboo grove, his dream of power turning to dust. He is remembered in Japan as the 13-day shogun, a cautionary tale of how quickly fortune can turn and how deeply the sin of betrayal is despised. So why did Oda Nobunaga have to die? The betrayal at Honno-ji was the ultimate pattern interrupt in Japanese history. It cleared the board. The man who avenged Nobunaga, Hashiba Hideyoshi, would change his name to Toyotomi Hideyoshi and complete the unification of Japan using Nobunaga's blueprint. And after Hideyoshi's death, that patient ally from the beginning, Tokugawa Ieyasu, would outmaneuver everyone to become the ultimate ruler, establishing the Tokugawa shogunate, which would bring over 250 years of peace and stability to Japan.
Nobunaga was a monster, a ruthless, brutal tyrant who burned temples and slaughtered thousands. But perhaps he was a necessary monster. His relentless ambition and contempt for tradition were the sledgehammer needed to shatter Japan's feudal system. He was too abrasive, too cruel, too radical to ever rule a peaceful nation. He was a conqueror, not a governor. His death, in a strange way, was the final, necessary act that allowed his vision to be completed by others. He forged the nation in fire, but it took his death for the flames to cool and for a new Japan to be built from the ashes. He had to die so that Japan could live. The story of Oda Nobunaga is a chilling reminder that history is not made by saints. It's often forged by demons whose legacies are written in blood and fire, and whose downfalls are just as important as their victories. What do you think? Was Nobunaga's death a tragedy or a necessary evil for the future of Japan? Let me know in the comments below.